Good morning, students. Today's topic is education for economic growth. This topic's objectives are to study the population of Indian minority community, and the next is to study the higher education of minority communities, and to study the role of higher education in socio-economic development of minority community, and to compare the socio-economic condition of Indian minority communities. And the next is introduction, education, and economic growth. Even before and certainly ever since the 1983 release of A Nation at Risk by the National Commission on Excellence in Education. National economic competitiveness has been offered as a primary reason for pursuing school reform. The Commission warned, if only to keep and improve on the slim competitive edge we still retain in world markets. We must dedicate ourselves to the reform or our educational system for the benefit of all, old and young alike, affluent and poor majority and minority. And the education responding to these urgent words, the National Governors Association in 1989 pledged that US students would lead the world in math and science achievement by 2000. And according to the latest international math and science assessment conducted by the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Developments, OECD, like Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development program for international student assessment in the United States remains a long distance from that target. And these target, rather than worrying about the consequences, some have begun to question what all the fuse was about. Education researcher General Barisi, for example, has argued that no one has provided any data on the relationship between the economy's health and the performance of schools. Our long economic boom suggests there is not one, or that our schools are better than the critics claim. And the next is truth. Truth be told, the brass's critic is not entirely misplaced. Most commentators rely more on the consumed common sense understanding that countries must have good schools to succeed economically rather than presenting conclusive empirical evidence that connects what students learn in school to what subsequently happens in a nation's economy. This is the even economists, the people who think the most systematically about the way in which human capital affects a nation's economic future have scripted the heart of the question by looking only at school entertainment, namely the average number of years students remain in school and the using average years of schooling as an indicator of a country's human capital has at least two major drawbacks. First and foremost, most the approach assumes that a student is diverse school systems around the world receive the same educational benefits from a year of schooling and this average years of schooling uh, more schooling as a year a year of schooling in Papua New Guinea and a year of schooling in Japan are treated as equally productive. And second, this measure does not account for learning that take place outside the classroom, within families, among peers, or via the internet. For example, a more direct measure of a country's human capital is the performance of students on tests in math and science. Something that might be called the average level of cognitive skills among those entering a country's workforce. And this workforce at one time internationally compare, comparable information on student performance was not available for a sufficient number of countries over a young enough period of time to allow for systematic study, which is why Economists rely, relied upon the less informative measures of school attainment. Now, they test score data for many countries over an extended period of time are readily available. It is possible to supplement measures of educational attainment with these more direct measures of cognitive skills. And the next is the measuring cognitive skills. Measuring cognitive skills, reaching these conclusions required a multi step analysis. The first step was to use the 12 PESA and other international math and science assessments dating back to 1964 to contract an index of cognitive skill levels for a large sample of countries at various points in time. Because the number of countries participating in the 12 test administrations changed for one administration to the next. And because testing agencies have made no attempt to link their results to one another, we needed to develop comparable scores for each test. And the measuring is this required a norm against which each test could be calibrated. Fortunately, we could construct that norms by using information for tests in the United States, the country that has had the earliest, most sophisticated, and most comprehensive system of testing. And the United States has participated in all of the international tests since 1964, and it has also maintained a separate longitudinal testing system of its own, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP. With that information is in hand, it was possible to calibrate scores on each of the spread international tests to one another via the connection of those tests to the NAEP and to obtain further precious. We used the variation in scores across a subset of the more advanced developed countries to obtain an estimate of the spread in in the form of the score across countries. By following these two steps, we were able to aggregate all available scores for each country into measures of average cognitive skill levels for each country. The 50 countries for which we were able to develop a comparable measures of cognitive skill levels include the 30 democracies that have market economies and have been accepted as members of the OECD, and most of which are at a relatively high level of economic development. And the other 20 countries are lower, the lower level of economic development. Identify top performers like Finland and Japan. Average performance such as the United States and Germany, and low performers that include Albania and Philippines and South Africa. Impact on economic growth. Impact of economic growth. We wanted to use this new information to compare the economic benefits of higher levels of just school and attainment with the benefits of higher levels of cognitive skills. We therefore took measures of average educational entertainment and average cognitive skill levels for as many countries as possible and examined their relationship to the average annual growth annual growth rate in the country's gross domestic product, that is GDP per capita from 1960 through 2000. And the impact of economic growth is, first, we looked out looked just at the impact of average school attainment on the economic growth rate. An adjustment was made for the initial level of GDP because it is easier to grow if you are starting out at a lower level. That is, it is easier to copy more productive technologies than to initiate progress on your own. And the economic growth, when we performed this analysis, we found, as other economists before us, that when the average number of years of schooling in a country was higher, the economy grew uh, at a higher annual rate over subsequent decades. Specifically, we found that across the 50 countries, each additional year of average schooling in a country increased the average 40-year growth rate in GDP by about 0.37 percentage point. And that may not seem like much, but consider the fact that since World War II, the world economic growth rate has been around 2 to 3% of GDP annually, and lifting it by 0.37 percentage points is a boost to annual growth rates of more than 10% of what would otherwise have occurred a significant amount. This is the that may not seem like much, but consider the fact that since World War II, and the economic growth is the impact of improved cognitive skills as measured by the performance of students no, no on math and science tests is considerably larger when we performed the analysis again, this time also including the average test score performance of a country. In our model, we found that countries with higher test scores experienced for higher growth rates. In this, that impact, another indication of the education quality and the to economic growth lies in our ability to explain global variation in GDP growth. When we tried to account for economic growth with information only about school attainment levels and the level of a country's GDP in 1960, we were able to explain only one quarter of the differences we saw among countries. And but when we also included cognitive skills in our statistical models of economic growth, we were able to contribute in nearly quarters of the difference among countries to these three factors. And in other words, higher level of cognitive skills appear to play a major role in explaining international differences in economic growth. And next, we see more rocket scientists or basic skills for all to gain additional insight into the relationship between cognitive skills and economic growth. We examined that separate impact of improvement at different levels of a nation's distribution of skills. And loosely speaking, is it a few rocket scientists at the very top of the distribution who spur economic growth? Or is it educational for all that is needed? And to address this question, we measured the share of students in each country who reach their should of basic competency in mathematics and science, as well as the share of students who perform at very high levels. To estimate the importance of basic competency, two, we identified the share of students performing at least at a very basic level, that is, no more than one standard deviation below the international average of all OECD countries. In the average OECD country, in our study, 89% of the students achieved at least at this very basic level. In this level, the share of students with at least basic skills and ranged widely among the countries, from as low as 18% in the Peru to 97% in the Netherlands and Japan's. These are the important basic competencies, and we see to show the ability the ability to develop a large grade of high performing students. We identified the share of students performing at very high levels at or above one standard deviation over the OECD average. On average, across all countries, 6% of students performed at that high level. And once again, countries varied norms enormously in this respect. The percentage ragging from as low as 0.1% in Colombia and Morocco to 18% in Singapore and Korea and 22% in Taiwan. And which is more important for growth? Having a substan- substantial grade of high performer or bringing everyone up to a basic level of performance. And this basic level of performance is to see the performance are the answer. It seems into is not one or the other but both. When we esteem the importance of each within the same model, we found each of them to be separately important to economic growth. That is, both the performance of countries in ensuring that almost all students achieve at basic levels and their performance in producing high achieving students seem to matter. And the next is the reasons that a substantial grade cadre of highly skilled citizens and near universal basic skill matter are not difficult to Imagine, even if a country is simply making use of new technologies developed else- elsewhere, as is often the case in developing parts of the world. The more workers that have at least basic skills, the easier it will be for them to make use of those new technologies. And these technologies, some workers need a high level of skill so they can help adopt the new technologies to their countries. In particular situation, in countries on the technological frontier, substantial numbers of scientists, engineers, and in, other innovators are obviously needed. But so is a labor force that has the basic skills needed to survive in a technologically driven economy. And this type of economy, the impact of becoming a world leader, and the impact of becoming a world leader, what would it mean for economy growth? Then, if a country like the United States, currently performing somewhat below the average of OECD countries, managed to increase its performance by 50 points or zero point 0.5 standard deviations, so that it would score alongside the world leaders. And this leaders, the impact on average on the PISA 2006 math and science exams, countries such as Canada and Korea scores about 50 points higher than the US, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, about 60 points higher, and Finland as many as 74 points higher. That increase of 50 test points is exactly what George H.W. Bush and the nations are the country like the United States and currently performing governors together promised in 1989 the United States would achieve by the year 2000. And the next is uncomfortably, unfortunately. Unfortunately, no such gains were realized But had the promise been fulfilled by 2000, our results suggest that GDP would by 2015 be 4.5% greater than in the absence of any such gains. That 4.5% increment as GDP is equal to the total the US currently spends on K 12 education. In other words, had that money effectively raised cognitive skills by the 50 test points that would have brought the United States close the world leadership. The economic returns to the country would probably have been enough to cover the entire cost of the education in 2015 and after. And the American expectation, the United States has never done well and on international assessments of students' achievement. Instead, its level of cognitive skills is only about average among the developed country. Yet the country's GDP growth rate has been higher than average over the past century. If cognitive skills are so important to economic growth, how can we explain the puzzling case of the US? And the US, the part of the answer is that the United States may be resting on its historic record as the world's leader in educational attainment. In addition, the United States has other advantages, some of which are entirely separate and apart from the quality of its schooling. And the US maintains generally freer labor and product markets than most countries in the world. There is less government regulation of firms, and trade unions are less powerful than in many other countries. Put more broadly, the US has generally less instru- institution of government in the operation of the economy and including lower tax rates and my minimal minimal government production through nationalized industries, and the nationalized industries taken together and these characteristics of the US economy encourage investment, permit the rapid development of new products and activities by firms, and allow US workers to adjust to new opportunities. And now, just a matter of money. Just a matter of money, our evidence of a clear, strong relationship between cognitive skills and economic growth should encourage continued reform, efforts, improvements in mathematics, performance called for by no child left behind would matter, and contrary to what critics sometimes suggest. And the matter of money, yet reforms should bear in mind that money alone will not yield the necessary improvements. Many expensive attempts around the world to improve schooling have failed to yield actual improvements in student achievement. And economic growth flows only from reforms that bring actual improvements in cognitive skills, identifying what works and how to implement it on a society. Wide scale remains a challenge, not only for the US, but also for many nations across the globe. But if we are to remain economically competitive, we need to solve the puzzle of our schools and meet the governance challenge. We should not simply because we have failed to meet them in the past. Decide that the goals were not leg- legitimate or important. And the next is the education directly affects economic growth insofar as it is essential to improve human capital. Let's take this step by step. An economy's production capacity depends on different factors. These include physical capital, technology, and the number of workers, as well as their quality. This quality is largely determined by what is called human capital, the stock of knowledge, skill, and habits. An increase in workers' educational level improves their human capital, increasing the productivity of these workers and the economy's output. This is the topic and the end of this topic. Some references is there. These are the references of this topic. At the end of this topic, it's a multiple choice question. First question is an increase in national income because of an increase in prices only is called an increase in real income, increase in national income at constant prices, increase in nominal national income, and increase in national income at base year prices. The answer of this question is increase in nominal national income. And the next question, the national income of a country for a given period is equal to consumption and investment expenditure incurred by the government, consumption and investment expenditure incurred by Indian abroad, and consumption and investment expenditure incurred by private sector, and consumption and investment expenditure incurred by all the above. The answer of this question is consumption and investment expenditure incurred by all the above. And next question, the growth rate in per capita income at current prices is higher than that of per capita income at constant prices because the former takes into account the rate of growth of production, growth of population, increase in price level, growth of money supply, increase in the wage rate. The answer of this question is increase in price level. And the next is the value of all final goods and services produced by the normal residents of a country and their property, whether operating within the domestic territory of the country or outside in a year is termed gross national income, net national income, gross domestic product, net domestic product. The answer of this question is gross national income. And the next question, gross domestic product is more than the net domestic product. Gross domestic product is called gross because its computation does not exclude com- cons- consumption of capital in production process and substitute to consumption of goods, earning of foreign exchange in domestic country, informal economy. The answer of this question is consumption of capital in production process. And the next question, which one of the following is responsible for bringing out the report on national and per capita income in India? Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Human Resource Development, Ministry of Human Home Affairs, and Ministry of Statistic and Program Implementation. The answer of this question is Ministry of Statistic and Program Implementation. And the next question is the main reason for the low growth rate in India in spite of high rates of saving and capital formation is low rate of investment rate, low level of foreign investment, low capital output ratio, high capital output ratio. The answer of this question is high capital output ratio. And the next question, in India, national income statistics are computed by which of the following? Planning Commission, Ministry of Finance, Central Statistical Officer, and RBI. The answer of this question is Central Statistical Officer. And the next question is this disguised unemployment typically lead to low level of income levels despite creating perception of high levels of employment. Distinguished unemployment generally exists in manufacturing sector, agriculture, small scale industries, and urban societies. The answer of this question is agriculture. And the next question is the last question of this topic. When large number of workers lose employment due to automation of industrial processes, it is called sessional unemployment, structural unemployment, distinguished unemployment, and cyclical unemployment. The answer of this question is struc- structural unemployment is the right answer. And this is the all about the topic education for economic growth. At the end of this topic is thank you